So my name is Keith. This is
I'm Jay.
Jason. I was telling Jason about your speech last night.
Okay.
And I couldn't help myself when you were doing the peace and the okay symbol, because I was telling you the mentor that we followed with the emotional intelligence started off with a thumb and a point.
I've seen that one too, yeah.
And when you asked the question, you know, why is this difficult? This event isn't for me, but I was dying to answer. So I was the one that says, creating a new neural pathway. I couldn't wait. Can you help break down the importance of being, well, you framed it through mental health, but emotional intelligence really is being aware. Why is it so important for these athletes here to be cognizant of their mental health or emotional intelligence?
So many reasons. How much time do we have?
As long as you want.
No, I think, so the biggest thing for me is obviously the awareness piece and getting to know yourself, because I can't tell you how many athletes, coaches, and parents will reach out to me and it's, I'm frustrated and I don't want to be frustrated after a mistake, or I'm so nervous before a big game, can you help me not be nervous, or whatever the emotion is. And their goal is they want to get rid of the emotion. And I tell them right off the bat, I'm happy to help you and we can work on it, but I'm never going to get rid of the emotion for you. Because if we take away the emotion, why are you here? Why are we playing? I'm also going to take away the fun, right? And so the idea of the self-awareness, emotional intelligence is not to get rid of that feeling or that experience. It's to understand and be prepared to know when it comes. What triggers certain emotions in me? When am I going to feel these things? Understand how they impact you so you can feel more confident and prepared in that moment to navigate and move forward with that emotion, right? Because like nerves aren't the enemy. Nerves are great. And especially if you can start to understand what nerves truly are, like emotions are just a physiological experience in our body that we then label and try and make sense of. And we label it differently based on what's going on around us, right? Because if your heart is racing and I took away all the contextual information, is your heart racing because you're angry? Is your heart racing because you're excited? Is your heart racing because you're scared? Is your heart racing because you're nervous? There's a lot of like overlap in what happens in our body. And so if we can just embrace the physiological experience and say, okay, either is this valuable, how can I use it, or how can I shift it to be more beneficial in the moment, you're gonna be able to navigate those situations with much more ease and confidence and clarity, right? Because realistically, what are those nerves? It's adrenaline pumping through your body. Guess what you need to be able to go out there on the ice and do what you need to do?
Adrenaline.
You need that adrenaline. And so one of the lines I use with athletes all the time when it comes to that labeling, that emotion, is sometimes we just need to reframe it, right? So is it butterflies in your stomach, or do you have a fire in your belly, right? Suddenly, the idea of having a fire in your belly, you're like, all right, let's go. I got this. I'm excited. I got this extra fuel that's going to push me through, right? Butterflies, we all hear butterflies and we're like, oh no, this isn't good. They're the same exact thing. It's just how you're approaching it. And so I don't want to take away the fire in your belly, right? Because you're actually more alert. You're more reactive. You're more attentive. You're going to have a little bit of that like sharpness in your step. That's great. Let's just use it. Let's not run away and hide from it.
Is it true that if you're pushed just a little bit outside your comfort zone where you're at that point, that's where you have the possibility of actually putting yourself into a flow state? You mentioned being more sharper. Is it tough to even get to that point if you're just really comfortable? You almost have to be outside your comfort zone to achieve that, correct?
Yeah, well, so not to get too kind of sciencey with all of this. But
we love that. We love that.
Have you ever heard of the Yerkes-Dodson law?
No.
So the Yerkes-Dodson law looks at our the relationship between our physiological arousal and our performance. And it's basically just like a bell curve. So as your arousal increases, so does your performance level up until a certain point, and then it starts to decrease, right? So if you're too low, you're bored, you're tired, you're lackadaisical. If you're too high, it's anxiety. That middle is that perfect like peak performance zone, right? The interesting thing with the Yerkes-Dodson law, though, is that that chart is different, one, for every single person, and it's different in different contexts. And so if you're doing an easier task, you actually need more arousal to increase and improve your performance. Because if it's so easy, you might be not paying attention enough, so you need that pressure to be like, oh, like, let me kind of dial in and like do this, right? If you're doing something that is new to you or you're already not confident in, you're going to be a little bit lower on the arousal level. So it changes all the time. And so when it comes to self-awareness and emotional intelligence, it's figuring out what is my peak arousal level for the task I'm doing right now. And I talk to teams about this all the time because there's that element of just confidence and skill, but there's also, we're all different people, right? And so everyone's peak performance is a little bit different. And so look around the locker room. We all know that one player who before games needs to be bouncing off the walls, hyping everyone up, is like all energy. But we also know the guy that sits in his locker with his headphones on and wants that calm and quiet, right? And it's an element of, don't just copy what you see, figure out what's your zone. And maybe it's trial and error, especially the younger you are. Try different things out, see how it impacts you. Reflect on your really successful moments and the challenging moments in the games you felt like you were in it or not. What were you doing? So you can kind of adjust it.
I like that.
But there's also the element of, like, you guys got to be respectful of your teammates too, and know, like, there's certain parts of our pregame that is team oriented. We're all doing the same thing. But there's also certain parts where we got to, like, I know what you need. I got to let you do what you do because I need you to be at your best.
Yeah.
And so it's in team sports especially, sometimes it's hard because you're juggling 20 plus individual needs in that situation. But yeah, it's all about getting to know yourself. What's that zone I need to be in, and how do I get to that zone? Do I need to, like, do something to pump myself up and increase my arousal? Do I need to do some breathing and calm my arousal down? What I think is really interesting is a lot of athletes I've worked with, actually, we've realized that they were doing too much to increase their arousal before a game just because that's what they thought they were supposed to do. And a lot of my athletes, I look a lot at music because music is a really good way to tap into your arousal, right? And they all had these super hyped up, like, pregame playlists, whether it's house music or rap, and they were like, yeah, this is what we were supposed to listen to before a game. And I'm like, yeah, but how are you feeling when you step on the ice? And they're like, oh, I'm so wired, I can't really focus. So a lot of them have actually shifted their pregame playlists, soft country music, calming music, some music that's, like, happy in the middle, where it's, like, it's not too dull, it's not going to put you to sleep, but it's, like, chill, calm music that just kind of gets them
too
in,
much. I never
in their
thought
zone.
about that. That's actually really insightful.
That makes sense, hearing all the kids we've asked today what their pregame hype songs are, and there was a few of them that surprised us. Like, one kid said Adele, and I'm like,
yeah, but you could also tell by his demeanor too. He was very dialed in. His cadence was perfect when he was talking, and now hearing that, that actually makes sense. That's a really cool red flag. What question did you have, Jay?
One question I got when I was reading the back of your book here, it brought something to mind. Having lived through it, playing hockey, and then later on coaching, you see a lot of kids that are dealing with parents that maybe have kind of, the kids love the sport, but the parents just kind of force them and push. Like, what advice do you give to the kids like that to try and overcome the challenge and the pressure from the parents?
Yeah, that's a super hard one because I feel like I run into this challenge as a coach, as a teacher, all of these things, because you can control the locker room, the classroom, the practice, but you can't control what's happening in the car on the way home. You can't control what's happening at the dinner table. No matter how much we want to, like, our reach is limited, right?
Right.
And so I think there's a few ways to go about it. I think sometimes it's more just encouraging and facilitating a little bit more of, like, honest and open communication within the family between parents and kids. And it's not easy, but understanding that 99.9% of all parents are well-intended. They just want the best for their kids. And so helping kids understand that, like, what your parents are doing that might be really difficult for you is not because they're trying to hurt you or make things harder. It's because they care and they love you, but it's not landing, right? And so figuring out a way to help them kind of voice their needs and their desires and their wants, which, again, is never easy.
Right.
But I think that's super important. And also just helping them help their parents, which, again, sounds backwards sometimes. But, again, if we're interacting with the kids, that's our touch point, right? Helping them really work with their parents to find the value of the experiences that they're having together, and really shifting away from wins, losses, points, status, all of that, and just realizing, like, the sport is going to end. Whether it ends when you're 15, 25, 35, it ends for everyone. And so that's one of the things that I really highlight in my book. That's why I call it Everything I Got. Because, right, we think an athlete hears everything I got, and they're like, that's what I got to give, that's what I got to put into it. but it's really at the end about everything I got from playing these games. And one of the things that I am forever grateful for is the experiences with my parents and my family, whether it's going to places we never would have gone to before. All of this time in the car or at games. Like, I have an older sister. I started going to all of her games, watching her play. And yeah, as a sibling, sometimes it's like, oh, I have to sit in the car again and go see you. But now I remember, like, I look back on that, I'm like, we spend so much time together as a family. I have a younger brother. He got dragged to all my games. And then me and my sister both go back home to see his games now. And so, like, especially in your teenage years, it's when you end up spending more time with friends than family. But sports actually are what brought my family together. Hours in the car, hours in airports, hours in rinks, whatever it is, like, that's time that you're getting together and you're experiencing all of these really cool things. And so just shifting that perspective of, like,
Smart.
You're getting a lot out of this. Your parents love you. They want the best for you. If it's not the same thing that you want, encourage them to have that conversation and say, look, Mom, Dad, like, I love this experience. I love playing. It's fun. I don't know if I, like, want the same outcome that you want, but, like, I love all of the things that we're getting out of it together. That's one way to approach it. But it's not an easy conversation.
All right, well, hopefully this one's a little easier. You did another thing yesterday that I love. You asked everybody to raise their hand as high as you can. And then you said, raise it a little bit more. There's 300, 400 people in there. Everybody went a little bit higher. And you spoke to that the human body is almost wired almost to be protective, because when the caveman was, you didn't say this, but this is how I perceive it, caveman's roaming the earth, and his subconscious says, I better not go into that cave because I might be eaten. And so he did it for survival.
Yeah.
But because we're not living in that world anymore, our brain almost protects us from ourselves. So if I feel like I'm at my max on my bench, like you said, that's because that's what my brain's telling me. But we're probably only, 50% of the way? How do you unlock that to allow yourself to push even further?
I think the more you can experience uncomfortable things and the more you can put yourself in discomfort, the more you're going to be able to grow and be able to push past those things. And so it doesn't always have to be a sports-specific situation that's going to help you push past it in the gym, right? Even something as simple as, like, ice baths or things like that. Like, yes, there's other values, like, physiologically that can benefit from that, but just the experience of getting in an ice bath and then seeing that, yes, it's freezing, but after a few minutes, you can actually handle it a little bit better than you thought you would, right? And so it's just this exposure of, like, your comfort zone is going to stay exactly the same if you never leave it. The only way you can grow your comfort zone is to step outside of it, stand in that discomfort until after a while you realize, oh, I'm actually comfortable here now, right? And it's repetition, it's exposure, it's all of those things. And so that's the way that I really think we can learn to push past our physical boundaries, is by experiencing more uncomfortable, new, difficult situations. And something that I think we overlook a lot is we think discomfort and we automatically think physical. Things can be emotionally uncomfortable too. And just sit in it, right? Like nerves, frustration, fear. Don't run away. Just, like, sit in it, feel it. And you'll realize that, like, being nervous isn't the end of the world.
Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
When we first got here, we were like, we got to get our first guest. And the first person I went and asked, hockey player, he was scared. But I felt like let down, like cold calling, like I got turned down. And it would have been easy just to quit and just sit here, but getting comfortable, pushing through, we ended up winning the day. So get comfortable being uncomfortable is how we're all going to grow.
Yeah. And actually, one of my favorite books is called The Upside to Your Dark Side. And I make my psychology class read it because it's all about emotions. And one of their chapters is called The Rise of the Comfortable Class. And it talks all about how, like, as a society, like, things that used to be luxuries, we now almost view as necessities, right? Like, you would never buy a car without air conditioning, right? Our mattresses, we have all these perfect, like, numbers to fit. Some people won't even, like, go into a car on a plane without a phone or a tablet or a movie because, like, boredom is uncomfortable, right? We never sit in boredom anymore. And so as these luxuries now become necessities, our ability to navigate discomfort decreases, right? And that then has impacted our emotional discomfort as well, because we live in a world where we can adjust our physical comfort pretty quickly. You can go change the thermostat, you can flip a switch, whatever it is, and we can't do that with our emotions. And so now, because we never have to physically sit in discomfort for more than a few minutes when we're emotionally uncomfortable and we can't flip a switch to change it, we don't know how to navigate it. So it's so interesting to think about how our emotional and physical world and experiences overlap and interact with each other. And I think we have to be mindful of like the world and the experiences where we're setting up for ourselves and how it's building that. And I even think like from a parenting perspective, right? Again, parents are so well intended, but it's okay to allow your children to experience frustration, failure, sadness, these uncomfortable things, because it's going to help them grow.
100%.
Yeah. It's like exercising. You know? A lot of what you said made sense too, especially like someone like us moving from the Northeast down to Florida. You know, everyone's like, "Oh, it's so hot," and now it's like you're comfortable sweating just because you've gotten to that point. So that makes a lot of sense. What do you tell? A lot of times, and I know this is all mental. A lot of times you'll hear of an athlete, maybe, you know, I can't do the things I used to do, whatever it may be, but your body, your body still can do it. So what do you tell them to break through that? How do you unlock that?
I think it depends on what the skill or thing is that they're struggling to break through and undo, right? So you're saying in a situation where they can't do something that they've done before. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it just becomes frustration and, almost depression. How do you get them past that?
Yeah, and sometimes it depends on the individual, right? Is the thing that's holding them back a fear of failure? Is the thing that's holding them back like an identity too closely tied to the outcome? Is the thing that's holding them back pressure and expectations because they've done all these things and now everyone's expecting them to continue it, right? That's why something such as like the sophomore slump is very real, because you come in freshman year, no one knows who you are, and it's like, cool, I'm a nobody, there's no expectations, I'm a freshman, and then you have a great freshman year, and then you come back and suddenly everyone's like, hey, you're that person that did all this stuff last year, now we expect you to do more. And so like the sophomore slump is a term for a reason. But so again, there's little nuanced differences in what causes that. And so sometimes just digging deeper and figuring out, okay, where's the root of this challenge coming from? That might adjust the approach a little bit. But what I try and do a lot with athletes is just say there's a specific thing, and we'll go very broad. So say you're a goal scorer and you're not like scoring anymore, right? Just really struggling to find the back of the net, going through a dry spell. Sometimes I'll give an athlete a piece of paper and I'll say, I want you to write down every single thing you need to do to accomplish this. So everything you need to do to score a goal, or if you're a figure skater, every little thing you need to do for this jump, whatever it might be. And they write it down, and everyone's different. Some people just write a bullet list of words. Some people actually write it in paragraph form, but there's all of these little things, right? With a shot, it's like shifting your weight, where your eyes are, the follow through, maybe it's positioning. There's all these things. And then sometimes I'll say, okay, here's a pencil or highlighter. I want you to just circle and highlight the 3 most important things in all of those words. And maybe it's like just the weight of their foot. Maybe it's the release. Maybe it's the positioning. And I'm like, okay, I want you to choose one. Practice, next game, whatever it is. Just focus on doing that one thing. Because typically what ends up happening when we start struggling with something, we start overthinking the things that were automatic for us before. And our body, at this point, when we get to a high level, our body's moving a lot faster than our brain. So if we're thinking through the step, we're slowing down our body, which is then making that shot come off a second too late, which is going to make it easier for the goalie. That's why he's saving the shot that you normally always used to do, right? That's why the figure skater is not landing her jump, because she's half a second off on part of the rotation. So we're overthinking something that we should just be trusting our body to do, and we're overthinking because of X, Y, and Z, the fear of failure, the pressure, the expectations. And so taking away that and giving them the freedom of like, I don't want you to think, but we need to give you somewhere. Because if you just say, don't think, just play, which is a very common response. Yeah. Coaches are like, oh, I just told them, like, don't think, just go out there and do it. Which in theory sounds great, right? But our brain's not designed to be empty. It's not designed to be a blank space. So if we say don't think, it's like cross your fingers, let's hope the right thing comes to mind in the moment. And again, the way our brain is wired to keep us safe, the natural thoughts that come up are not, what if I do great? What if I score? What if I nail it? It's, what if I miss? What if I mess up? What happened last time I missed it? And it's all these negative things. So we need to be intentional. We need to fill that space with something so there's not room for the negative thought to come in. But we don't want to fill it with too much so we're overthinking. So I usually find like one key step, one key moment, just something to focus on and have that trust and confidence that like everything else will fall into place, right? So I oftentimes, I don't always do this intentionally, but it tends to happen that way, whether it's a shot, whether it's a jump for a figure skate or whatever it might be. The things that they highlight, there usually tends to be one in the beginning and one at the end. And so I'm like, yeah, just focus on where you start, where you're going to finish. The middle part's going to fall into place and come naturally.
Okay, mine's a little bit different. I love that, by the way. That's very sharp because our brain is mostly negative wired.
Well, it's true, and it's almost like you start thinking about overthinking at some point, too.
How important is tonality for coaches or individuals when talking to? Because like you said, their intentions might be good, but the context in which their tone is, how important is that? Because our brain receives it, obviously, in different ways.
It's huge. One of my favorite studies to like talk to coaches about, and I'm not going to remember all the nuanced details of it, but there's been studies that have looked at like leadership and feedback, and they've found that the tone that the feedback is given is more impactful than the actual context. So they've done studies where they've given people positive feedback with a positive tone, positive feedback with a negative tone, negative feedback with a positive tone, and negative feedback with a negative tone. And the people who were given feedback in a positive tone, even if the feedback was negative, walked away from the encounter feeling much better about themselves than the people who were given positive feedback with a negative tone. Like, humans tap into that tone, and even if you're telling them like, you did great, that was awesome, I loved all these things, but you're saying it in a way that sounds like you're scolding them or you're disappointed, the emotion piece like taps into that human like feature, and it resonates so much more than the content. So tone is so important.
That's not something even individuals can override, right? Like if your tone is good, they will act. Is it the mirror neurons or something in your brain kind of digest that? Like you said, because if I said, Julia, that book is well written, or if I said, Julia, that book's well written, like they're the same words, but they have two different meanings.
Yeah.
So that tone is massively important. Mm-hmm. Do you see a lot of coaches that kind of, because this is a soft skill, they kind of overlook that? They're almost hurting themselves just because how they say something?
Yeah, and I don't think it's intentional. I think sometimes as athletes, they forget that coaches are just as much a part of that performance as them, right? And they're just as invested. And so I always like want to approach coaches the same way I approach athletes, right? Game day is game day for you too. You're not on the ice performing, but you're on the bench. You're going into that locker room and you got to arrive and show up and make decisions just like a player. Your decisions are slightly different, but you're feeling that pressure too. And so I think for coaches, it's so important to like do the same work, increase that self-awareness, right? What are the skills and techniques and tools for you to approach that conversation with an athlete in the moment in the way that's going to be most effective for them? I did my master's research on NCAA Division I coaches' intermission strategies and routines. So I specifically looked at intermissions in hockey games and how coaches navigated that emotional situation. And I looked at everything from what did you do before you went in the locker room, once you got in there, and once you left, and how do you make those decisions? And one of the coaches said in my interview with him was, it's not how you feel that matters in the moment, it's what they need, right? And so you may be really frustrated. You may feel like they're not playing great, but you need to know the players in that locker room and know what they need. They might need that little like kick in the butt to like get going, but even if they're not making you really happy right now, they might need you to be happy, right? And so it's emotional intelligence to the next level, because emotional intelligence has like 4 key features, and half of that's focused on your own self-awareness, but the other half is the interpersonal awareness and knowing what other people need and what they feel. And so really being able to tap into that and read into the room and say, okay, the guys need that burst of energy and positivity, or the guys need that like aggressiveness, that little bit of like a push. The guys need, what do they need in the moment? And so that's a huge skill, and that's something that takes time too. And it's hard because if you think about a coach, you need to plan practice, prepare a season, do all the tactical parts of coaching, then you also need to get to know the 20 plus individuals and figure out
And all their
how to
personality.
interact with them. Yeah.
So empathy has to be a massive pillar in this, the backbone behind that, right? Being able to see how the other individual's seeing the world through their eyes.
Yeah.
Getting to that point, you've talked about working with coaches and their tonality. A lot of coaches I've worked with over the years are just tonality is a big thing, but another thing is understanding the players. Are you teaching them like mirrors, labeling, sequencing like that to get to that point?
The coaches?
Yes.
Yeah, so I have to be honest. I have such an interest and passion in coaching. At this stage in the game, most of the coaches that reach out to me want me to work with their teams and their players and not necessarily with them. I have to give a ton of credit because the teams that have reached out and the coaches that have also bought in and done the work, like there's a massive difference, not just in the success, but the level of coaching. And so like, I want to give a huge shout out to Dan Muse, who's currently New York Rangers assistant coach, but he was NCDB coach last year. He won world championships with the U18 team. And he brought me in to work with NCDP last year. But the one person on that team that met with me the most consistently one-on-one was Dan himself. And it was a lot of, here's what happened this week in practice or on the bench or in the game, here's what I did or what should I have done better, or here's my pregame, how can we kind of tweak that? And so I like look back to Dan all the time, and like the coaches that are willing to like acknowledge themselves too as lifelong learners and as participants in this performance mindset and figuring out like what role am I playing in my own performance and in their performance, they're the ones that like you see a difference, right? Because also then the communication is consistent. It aligns with what I'm talking to the players about, and then they hear it again at practice. They hear it again in the meetings, and that repetition that I was talking about yesterday is so important. And so when the repetition comes up and it happens over and over again, that's the most valuable piece. So like I would love to have a better answer and say this is what I do with all the coaches, but I have to be honest, right? A lot of coaches are like, oh, I love what you do. I'd love for you to come work with my players. And I'm like, I'd love to work with your players, but I'd also love to work with you. And I think that's the next step of like coaching education and coaching kind of self-awareness is really diving into that.
So the most successful ones are the ones that are seeking to understand.
Yeah.
All right, well, to wrap up, where can, if any coaches, teams, businesses want to retain your services and or get your book, how can people get a hold of you or your brand new book?
So the book is on Amazon. It's called Everything I Got by Julia Allain. I'm on social media, so Instagram is Allain Mental Performance. Allain's just my last name, Allain. Website, same thing, AllainMentalPerformance.com. Email, same thing, AllainMentalPerformance@gmail. So pretty consistent there and easy to find.
And last one, who's somebody in the psychology world, emotional intelligence world that you admire or look up to other than the gentleman that you just spoke about?
Ooh, that's a hard one. There's so many. Oh, I gotta think now because I wanna give the.
Well, what would be a starter if someone was looking to get into it?
I mean, like there's the legends like Ken Ravizza out there who was a really kind of big
Daniel Kahneman.
founder. Daniel Kahneman is huge and more of like the social economic side, all of that. Like there's just so many, and what I love is it's such a niche field, but it's also so broad because it overlaps with so many. Like picking one name is so hard for me.
Okay.
So.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on this podcast, and I've actually learned a little bit already, so this is really cool. And I can't wait to read your book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Pleasure meeting you.
Bye.